Okay, so this is going to be a quick video for early results if you got deferred or rejected. If you got rejected, it's literally one slide. The My general rule of thumb is you just got to move on. There's extremely rare exceptions to that case. So this is really more about if you do get deferred. The TLDR is that you need to continue to get all A's or at least try to maintain all your grades. The likelihood of why you got deferred typically goes into two categories. Either you weren't academically up to that profile that they're willing to accept you and take the risk on you as an early applicant for, or your activities were kind of sort of carrying you and compensating. They really liked your activities, your achievements, but your grades and your test scores were just not up there. Normally, I'm seeing a lot of the AP scores being the factor if that's relevant to you. Obviously, there's IBs and others. The other camp is that you have the grades and the test scores, but your essays, your teacher recommendations, your activities, your awards are really not up to par. And they want to hold on to you. So they know that you're a really good worker and you can work hard academically, but it's your IQ and your EQ that's kind of falling short. So obviously they're going to be pushing you to regular. Deferred, if you accept a deferred spot, they automatically push you to regular. And that means they're going to be able to see your first semester of senior year grades. That is so critical. If you're an S tier student applicant who got deferred and you're really still gunning for that, and you give me 2 Bs, it's pretty much game over. You have to maintain all A's if you're at the super, super top. Obviously, tier 1 and tier 2, they're going to be a little bit more lax about that. The second thing is you have to buff your activities and awards. Oh, I kind of want to do this for my editor. So TLDR, if you get deferred, you need to get all A's or at least best as you can. You want to buff your activities and awards because it still matters all the way up until March, just like a regular applicant. And you need to consider potentially more recommendation letters. Perhaps you have to solicit the support, get the endorsement of your principal or your vice principal. And then there's obviously sending an update letter or a letter of continued interest. When you send that, how you send that, I'm going to be discussing. And then last but not least, it's the creative YOLOs. Writing a rap song is one of my students saw online, said that worked. I could see some of those kinds of things happening. I have a couple ideas and examples from previous years that I've seen work as well. So let's jump into it. So if you get deferred, whether it's early decision or restrictive early action, they're all going to pretty much be the same. They'll give you an opportunity in the portal to accept the deferred position, and it automatically essentially pushes you to the regular application. You want to go through that entire portal, look through every nook and cranny. Oftentimes they'll have a FAQ where you can read about, should I send more stuff? Can I get more rec letters? And you want to specifically look out for the school's policies, because some of them will say, do not send us anything. And they'll get really annoyed if you do. So, but Jay, I heard that it's good to do this. Well, if the school's policy says not to send anything, you best follow their advice or follow their instructions and not send anything. For the ones that do offer an opportunity, jot some notes down. Hey, it looks like they give us an upload. Okay, it looks like they give us a text window and it's 500 words limited. So all those things are very important to jot down. Sometimes they don't tell you what you can do. They'll give you kind of a schedule. They'll say, hey, we will get back to you in January, or we'll open up the portal for deferral appeals and whatever, or updates in January. So you jot that down on your calendar. Follow those procedures. Once you do that, as I mentioned already, you want to focus on your grades and your activities. They still will matter. The question really becomes, by when, Jay, should I send a letter of continued interest, or by when should I send these updates? I applied November 1st, but since November 1st, I got my new SAT score from December, and I did much better. I got a 1540. Jay, I also got American Math competition and got into AIME for AIME 12. There's a bunch of reasons why there's this window for some students to want to look and say, I want to take advantage of sending updates. So if the school allows for it, look out how they do it. If they don't give you a procedure, then the general rule of thumb is you send it to the undergraduate admissions office's email. You put your identifiables, whether that's your Common App ID, your full name, your high school. Just make sure that they can properly identify you so that when you send an email, they can then take that and attach that to your file. review and assess your early applications, because if you get deferred, if you get rejected, that's not always a 100% indicator, but it's definitely an interesting data point for me as a counselor to see whether you need to maybe readjust some of your college list, whether you need to add more safeties, or whether you're fine as is because it's what we expected and we just keep on to the plan of applying to 15 schools, and also whether you should consider early decision 2 or not. So at the top level, you have places like Johns Hopkins, you have Vanderbilt, you got Carnegie Mellon, you have NYU. ED2 will make a difference. I've heard people say that, but I heard, Jay, that ED2 doesn't really help that much, or the percentage difference is not really there. It's a binding agreement, guys. A binding agreement is one of the biggest levers that you can pull at this stage in your process to give you an advantage when you apply. Obviously, it comes with a big commitment clause, so keep that in mind. When you're reviewing and assessing your early applications, these are the questions that I want to kind of flare out with you guys. Were you reaching and you knew it would be tough, but gave it a shot anyways? I know several of my students, they wanted to go give it their all and they went for the reach, even though the test scores weren't there, or even though the GPA wasn't there, and that's fine. It's just, if that's the case, don't overreact to saying, oh my gosh, I got rejected, I should change everything. If you knew walking in that it would be a tough call, recognize that it was a tough call, and sometimes the cards come out statistically not in your favor. The other, do you need to reassess your college list? So this is a little bit more extreme. Let's say we are applying early and you got deferred, and usually deferred to me is actually a good sign. Granted, for like Yale, I posted a video prior, like Yale, it's a great sign most of the times. And for Harvard, the sign or the signal you should get from that is a little bit more murky, because 83% of Harvard earlies get deferred anyway. So what is that really much telling you? But there are cases where you will get this shock, this reality check, right? It's like a punch to the face. And then you kind of reset and realize, holy cow, it is as much more competitive than I thought. That happens to a couple of students and a couple of parents. And if that's the case, you use that as an opportunity to talk to someone who has experience to help you readjust your college list based on looking at your grades, your test scores, how your first semester is doing right now. Because if you are not getting all A's, or if you're getting B's and C's in your first semester of senior year, and you're essentially clearly dipping a tier below compared to, let's say, your 11th grade results, then you should expect to have a worse outcome rather than a better outcome or an equal outcome, because that first semester of senior year is going to come into account. Do you need to revise your essays or major strategy? I think that, especially for my students, as you get from November 1st to December 15th, my students' essay writing abilities dramatically improve. And it's just the nature of the game. Jay, we applied, it's kind of a paradox, and it's kind of ironic that you're applying ideally sometimes to your dream school, let's say Stanford, but you are applying at the beginning of your learning curve for writing good college essays. I get better at writing essays or being able to evaluate good essays, recognize trends of what's cliche this year or not as I go from November to December. So even my advice and my standard of expectations of essay writing evolves, and that's natural. So one question you can always ask yourself is, did I learn to write better essays since I applied November 1st to my early? Can I then retroactively kind of go, can I apply the things I've learned and see if I can revamp some of my essays for the next set of regular applications? And then lastly, do you need to change your recommendation letters? It's not, this is not an available avenue for every student. Some students will have teachers give the rec letters, and then we could read it. You could talk with someone who has experience, and they can analyze whether this was good enough to compete for X school or Y school. And if you have an outlet, you have 2 weeks or so before January 1st deadlines come in to quickly try to see if you can swap things around. I caution, I'm obviously hesitating when I talk about this, because I caution a lot of parents and students when I give out these type of information that when they get deferred from one school, they need to switch off everything, and they're skipping, they're like not recognizing the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is your APs were all 3s and 4s, right? of course, you're not a strong candidate to get into Stanford if you're all threes and fours and you go to like, like a school in Orange County that's very competitive. That's not a competitive applicant academically. The other thing I see is like, yes, they're getting straight A's. They got straight A's since junior year, and they've been really pushing. But their 10th grade is where they faltered. That's where they had like 1 C and 3 B's. So they're looking immediately at, we need to change the recommendation letters, when the 800-pound gorilla in the room for me is, it's the 10th grade grade. That's probably why you got deferred, and you just have to continue into the regular. Be happy that you got deferred in that case, and try to show them that you have improved, or that you are consistent academically and capable of going to a school and an S-tier school academically. So when you're thinking about recommendation letters, it's pretty rare for me to suggest a change for that. It's also rare to actually know what the teachers wrote, because you sign a FERPA agreement and usually the teachers kind of keep it closed-lipped. I'm not going to talk too much about that. So let's talk about loci. So letter of continued interest. I see a lot of websites out there suggesting that you should send a letter of continued interest. And to me, I don't think a letter of continued interest right away makes a difference. I personally don't think it makes a difference. Instead, I treat it more like as an update letter. So it's better for you to hold off and not send a letter of continued interest, because basically it's going to be vapid. It's not going to have much substance besides showing I'm disappointed but committed and eager. Like, I can even see the whole cliche phrasings that people will typically be advised to write. So I'd skip all that, and I'd think about, okay, by when can I send an update letter with a compilation of all my latest activities, awards, new leadership, new projects I've embarked on, etc. And each school is going to be different, but generally speaking, you want to wait all the way up until the end of January. So you have up until mid-January, end of January. I've been telling my students, put on your calendar January 15th, email Counselor J about all the list of bullet points of all the updates that you can come up with, and then let's hash it together to see which ones have substance, which ones are great to suggest and that would kind of point the needle in your favor, versus others being just like kind of fluff that doesn't really move the needle much. So I don't really suggest a loci right after you get your results. I instead would prefer you give them one big punch, one big update in the end of January, because that's typically when they'll start wrapping up for students. They'll start giving out results probably end of February, beginning of March. So we're being a little bit more cautious in that regard. But yeah, it should have leadership updates if you got them, awards, competition updates, as I mentioned, like American Math competition, that December SAT, the results for those have come out. So hopefully if you did really well there, that could be an update. Your independent project updates, your portfolio updates, maybe you got your research published on a certain type of like reputable journal, et cetera, et cetera. Your grades, courses, exams, some deferred and later waitlisted portals will quite literally ask for that. I think one of the UC campuses literally asks you for, start by telling us like what your latest grades and test scores or your latest grades are. Use the opportunity to provide another why college short response. So at the end of your loci, or at the end of your update letter, okay, at the end of your update letter that you hopefully will submit by end of January, you want to provide just that one last EQ kind of why I feel this school, your college is right for me, and what I am so excited to bring and synergize to your school. So, but Jay, I already wrote a why college essay in the application when I submitted. That's okay. You have to obviously not be repetitive. You're going to have to find even more reasons. One pro tip I want to give about that is you hopefully have evolved since November 1st. So November 1st, you have your specific reasons why you want to go to Brown, but then you did something else. Then you conducted research over the winter break, got it published on, JEI, and you realized that there's a whole new area of interest that you want to conduct research further into, in addition to what you've already had established when you applied early. See that additional reason, you then go onto the college website and realize, oh my God, they have a professor that's renowned in that. They have a research institute and lab for undergraduates to participate in that is synergistic to that is ideal for that. So now you have this evolution and growth that is matching with even more reasons why you want to go to the college. Keep that in mind. I have a couple other techniques like that, but that was the thing that came to mind. Consider attaching additional rec letters. So some of the sites will say, hey, you should tell your counselor and you should try to see if your counselor will vouch for you. That could be awkward sometimes because, frankly speaking, if you're deferred or if you're rejected, that could also be for a reason. Maybe your counselor doesn't think you're necessarily a top tier student. So if you go up to them, you could be kind of, it could be the wrong route to take. So it's not for everyone, but let's say you have a certain degree, you have certainty that if you went to your vice principal, if you went to your principal, if you went to your high school counselor, they'll be like, oh my gosh, yes, I want to support you. What can we do? So I've seen principals send phone calls to the undergraduate admissions office of the school to say, hey, I vouch for, this kid here, my student. I heard that she was deferred or he was deferred, and I just want to let you know that she or he has our full support. And if you need anything at all, blah, 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 like that could be huge to have like a principal come out and say that. Jay, how do I request that? Well, again, as I mentioned, not every student is capable of soliciting and getting that type of endorsement. So you first have to kind of check yourself. But if that is within your cards, in my opinion, I would absolutely explore that. I would absolutely see if I can do that. Schedule an appointment. Say you want to have a talk after your early results and you'd love to get the best support you can. You're obviously trying to be very humble when you go up to them. You're asking them for their support. You're asking them earnestly for their help because you're so committed to the school. And then if you have a good relation or rapport with them, they'll say something like, yeah, I'll see what I can do. And that'll be a good signal for you. Last but not least, you can get creative. So I was talking to a couple of students about kind of crazy stories and scenarios. I posted actually, I think several months ago, about a student who was some sort of limbo, whether it was waitlist or whatnot. So deferred and waitlist are essentially the same thing, just different timelines, where she created a very interesting email subtitle. And it was like, attention, all admission staff, and then she wrote the email in a way where it was like she was pretending to be someone who is announcing that the admission staff totally missed this extremely interesting and potentially qualified student, which was her. And then she detailed some of the points, like this student is this. So she's talking about herself in the third person, and it worked. So there are stories like that are very creative. Granted, guys, you could be as creative as you want, but if you're getting straight C's your first semester of senior year, I don't care how creative you are, you're not going to get into Stanford like that. So please balance yourself. I see so many students are so desperate that they'll spend the time doing these creative things and not recognizing the more important foundational things that first have to be there, like your grades. But anyways, I wrote a list here. Signal commitment and passion by doing something unique. You could send not only the update letter, but in addition to that, a collage of your work that looks really nice. You could write a rap song. You could write poetry. Your entire update letter could be poetry based. And that could be really fun if it's done well, if it's done tastefully. You can do the marketing gimmick, as I mentioned, the example of the email. You could send a picture of a college themed or intended art piece or creation that showcases that you're really obsessed with the school. But I'm going to mention the last bottom point about being too desperate. You could start a YouTube channel or a TikTok channel to count the days, kind of like counting the days to Christmas or counting the days until your deferral gets, you get accepted. The last point, ride the fine line between spamming desperately and being funny, goofy, clever, and genuine in the way you want to go all out for a school. There's a fine line between it. I often have to manage the psychology of some of my students and also parents, where they're trying to reach for every straw that's possible. And you need someone you can trust. You need someone who could tell you, guys, yes, we could go for this, but you have straight C's. Like, let's realize what's important here. So make sure you have someone who you can bounce your situation off of, who could give you an objective understanding of what you should prioritize. And yeah, I thought that would be helpful there. If you get rejected, I told you I was going to keep it very short. Guys, if you get rejected, the only overturning that I've seen that has occurred over the 16 years I've done this is if basically a paper or a clerical error. So like, we rejected you. And we're like, what the, you didn't even defer us. And then we inquire into it and realize, oh, it's our fault. Our admission staff, we attached a transcript onto yours that was a completely different student. It was the same name. I've seen this happen. It's like the same name, but instead of the middle initials had a space for one student and the other middle initial did not have a space, and they mixed those two up, and one was like a 2.8 student, the other one was like a 4.3 student. So there was a huge mix up in that. They apologized, yada yada yada. Unless it's something like that, a rejection is very, very rarely overturned, and I essentially say move on. But yeah, you can look up the rejection appeal process. Like, for example, UCI, they don't really state it, so you have to Google it and kind of search and dig deeper into it. They'll have their own rejection appeal packet, and you have to fill out a packet and form and do that whole process. Some schools bar it completely. Like, they don't even have any procedures for rejections. If you're rejected, it's final. So you just have to accept that. If you do get rejected, everything else applies there, where you have to start thinking about reevaluating your college list potentially. You got to think about early decision 2. Should I change my major choice up a bit? Is it even possible for me to change my major choice up a bit? If my essays are already set for one major and you only have less than 2 weeks to finish off all the essays for your remaining 15 schools. So there's a lot of thoughts that go into it. My only point I'd want to end with here is I've seen students get rejected from USC, but then get accepted to Princeton, get accepted to Stanford. Like, the volatility of results that come out in the top 20s it's a black box essentially. There's so many other factors and reasons that could be involved in why one school will reject you, whereas another school will accept you. So a rejection isn't necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, we would prefer to get deferred, but this is where you need to talk with someone who has experience and who could tell you, yeah, that's just how the cards play out. Just continue on with your plan and do the best you can. Or, yeah, the reason why you got rejected and not deferred, but we're going to still stick to course is because we expected this. We saw your AP scores were all 3s and 4s. And for the school you're applying to, it's, this is kind of what we should have expected. Should we change things up a bit? No, not necessarily. We still have a really good college list that accommodates for some of your safer target schools. So talking to someone about that, I think, is always going to be helpful. And yeah, I think that's it. I'll talk to you guys later.